Well, hello, I'm Steve Barg, City Administrator for the City of Marshfield. Welcome to another edition of the Post-Council Meeting News Conference. We do this every day after a regular council meeting, get you caught up on what happened and how things are moving forward with the council and the city here in Marshfield. At this time, I'd like to turn it over, as I often do, to Mike Warren, representing Hub City Times.
All right, thanks, Steve. Well, as we kind of go over the agenda here for the October 26th meeting, not a terribly exciting agenda. Kind of a, I don't know, maybe what I would call just kind of a routine meeting, just kind of taking care of routine, regular business.
Yeah, it seems kind of calm from where we've been before. Obviously, earlier in the year, we had a lot of things that were hot button items that we were going through, but even more recently with the budget and some discussions with the clinic, we've had some meatier items on the agenda from time to time. This one's a little bit more quiet, but we're looking forward to being able to get back to probably some more busy items in the future.
All right. The agenda items that we'll highlight first, there were a lot of, three sort of, I don't know if I want to say special presentations, but presentations on things that you seem to hear about on an annual basis. Is that
Yeah,
right?
well, at least a couple of them. One of them is truly every year required to be, and that's the audit, where we have our auditors from CLA come in and tell us how the previous year went. A little bit later this year than sometimes, but it's kind of a big financial document for us to find out how the previous year turned out. Are there any concerns or issues that we need to be dealing with at the accounting staff level internally or at the council level externally, as far as, bigger plans for trying to deal with issues? We've had that in the past. In the last couple of years, you know this, Mike, we've dealt with the TIF transfer thing that we went through back in 2019 roughly, and that was a big issue that was talked about at the audit presentation. This year it's a little bit more like things are going well. I can touch on that in a minute. A couple of issues in the management report for the accounting staff to do. We talked about a policy that we could put in place to try and account for some things, but again, that's more internal or inside baseball than anything.
There was a presentation, or I guess update, on the UWSP Marshfield campus, I noticed. Maybe just to take us through what the council heard there and what was the purpose for having that on the agenda?
Yeah, we try and get people here from the college maybe once a year to talk about what's happening, especially in recent years where we know that enrollment has been down a little bit. And they acknowledged that. It was Marty Loy, the provost, and Michelle Bornke with UWSP Marshfield campus that spoke. And they have seen a decline in enrollment in the past 3 years. They had a little table that showed how it's diminished from, I think, 500 and some students back in 2018 to 300 and some now. But they did say that there's good things happening. They've seen some positive signs in terms of the new freshman class that came on board. They've got some new degree programs that they're working on. They talked about the MBA that they're working toward, and some of the things they're trying to do to beef up course offerings. So, and they also talked about a new use that is for diversity and inclusion, that they got a space now dedicated to some of those activities and the students who are involved. So they talked about the positive things happening, but they did acknowledge that not just here on our campus, Mike, but in the broad campus in Point and also in Wausau, all three of them have seen declining enrollment. I think system-wide, the UW colleges, the state colleges have seen declining enrollment. There's a few things that contribute to that. Certainly, over the years, I think they look at trends in terms of how many kids parents are having, what are the family size. But there's also a lot of people competing for their dollar. There's the tech colleges and others that have seen some favorability too in recent years with the trades and some of the opportunities that have come from that side of the coin. So they did do some Q&A. The main reason it's so important to us, Mike, is because the city and the county co-own the land and the building. So we are the property owners in a sense, and it's good to know what's happening and what kind of things they're doing to try to deal with the challenges that they're facing. And it was a good presentation.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Has that has not changed at all? From the time it was UW Marshfield, Wood County, to now it's UWSP at Marshfield. I guess, land ownership, if you will, has not changed. There's still a stake. I guess Marshfield still has a stake there and ownership in, and I guess annual contributions to that campus.
Yeah, and from the records I've seen, that goes back at least 5 decades. I mean, we have been definitely involved and working with the county on the larger projects, the CIP projects, as we call them. If they need to do major upgrades to roofing, heating and air conditioning and all these kind of things, we end up partnering with the college agrees to pay, the city agrees to pay half and the county agrees to pay half. But even on the operational level, we contribute about $50,000 a year toward their maintenance needs and some of the things to keep them. And the premise of it is, people might be saying, why are you giving money to the college? But even the operational side, Mike, what we're really doing is giving money toward projects to keep up the buildings and facilities and grounds, which we really, as a landowner, want to see happen. Theoretically, if they got up and left tomorrow, which is not going to happen, we'd want to know that the buildings and the facilities and the grounds have been maintained safely and effectively. So we do have a stake.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Not really. Again, we'll probably continue to hear more from them. We want to see it. Oh, sorry. We want to see enrollment go up. And sorry for the phone, everybody. Not sure how that's coming on to our.
Wherever it is, they're not here.
Yeah. I'm going to wait for a second. We definitely want to see enrollment increasing, as do the campus officials. But it's good to know that they are working on ideas, they're working on courses and degrees and programs that will really incentivize people to get involved, to check out the local campus here, along with other places they look at schooling after high school. And I think that they're taking some good strides.
Okay. And you mentioned the audit, which is an annual, in fact, you said, I think it's required, but there was a presentation basically reviewing the annual financial audit for the city?
Yeah, and the review was really good. We turned out as it is that we had a slight positive, in terms of our revenues versus expenses, which it might not sound amazing. People might think, well, isn't that what you're supposed to do? Budget conservatively for expenses, for revenues and the most possible for expenses so that you cover your costs. But we had a rough year. You and I have talked about this. We had tremendous legal expenses that we incurred for the various cases that involved the police chief, the mayor, a former police officer. And, that and some other things were working against us. Revenues were down in many areas. Interest revenue continues to dwindle because, as you know, your own personal checking accounts and savings accounts and those kind of things, interest used to be a significant part of our revenue. It's really not anymore. But with all that said, we still came out slightly on the plus side. So it was a good sign. The auditors gave us a clean bill of health on how we're doing business. They spoke well of the accounting and finance staff that are handling the journal entries and the books. And it was a positive review that we got. A couple of things that they want us to look at, which is not abnormal for them to point out. And we'll certainly follow up on those.
The city is still solvent, in other words.
We are, and we've come a long ways. And this came up in another item that we'll talk about in a minute here. We have, for example, we still have to use hundreds of thousands of dollars to balance the annual budget. And people might say, that's not good. You have to dip into your surplus to make the revenues and expenses meet for the next year. But we've come a long way in 3 years, Mike. We're reducing that amount. We're now fully covering our debt payments without tapping into other funds. We really are on the way out. We're hoping in the next 2 or 3 years to possibly even get our credit rating bumped back up to where it was. We were AA3 and now we're an A1. For those people who aren't familiar with this, they think AA3, A1, what's the pecking order here? But we dropped a step a few years ago and we'd like to get that back. We're taking all the right strides to become financially better. For the coming year, we're only going to be having debt at 49% of what the state allows. In the past, we've been up closer to 60%. So we're making strides and going the right direction.
Okay. And maybe we can jump to that item as long as we're talking
Sure.
finances. There was an item that says assessed value for 2022 budget per the final statement of assessment from the State Revenue Department. That sounds important.
It does. And, what's been happening lately is that the equalized value, what the state believes our market value of our property is, has gone up much more than our assessed value. And it's the assessed value that we use. Ultimately, it determines how much tax revenue we take in. So this year, we knew that we were having an increase in market value of about 5%. So we conservatively set our budget up based on a 1% increase in the assessed value to spread that across. And it turned out, now we just found out it's 2.09. So that 1.09 additional is going to produce a couple 100,000 plus for us. And we said to the council, here, you have three options. What do you want to do with this? You could A, reduce the tax rate. B, you could do more spending with that 200 plus thousand. Or C, you could reduce the amount of money that we were going to borrow from ourselves, basically, take from the general fund reserves to make the picture balance. Now, if it weren't for that last piece, you'd say, well, reduce the tax rate or do more spending. But when we're still using our own reserve monies to balance the budget, the obvious thing to do is to say, let's use less of that. So instead of roughly 600,000, we're going to use less than 400,000 now to balance it. And that's coming down from, a lot more in the last couple of years that we needed to take from ourselves to make the picture balance. So the council grabbed onto that as the best approach. And I know that there's a couple of members of the council who really wanted to reduce the tax rate if they could, and said so, really. But I think they realized that we're not in a place to do that right. The better thing to do is to use less of our reserves to balance the budget. Keep that coming down to where we get out of that mode, hopefully in 2 or 3 years. And then maybe 3 years down the road, if we had excess money, we could talk about either reducing the tax rate or doing more projects. At this point, the better things seem like using less reserve.
And the recommended action said approve use of additional assessed value growth to reduce budget deficit. And that's exactly what they did?
Yeah, so instead of using about 600,000, we're going to use less than 400,000, which, is still a lot of money from our reserves to balance the budget. Oftentimes we run a surplus and we don't need to tap into much of that, but that's the number that we want to keep getting down to zero in the next 2 or 3 years.
And is that doable?
I think it is. Ron and I have looked at that. We've made some good strides. We've cut the budget in some areas. We've kind of reallocated some expenses. Ron has done some great things, Ron Ullman, our finance director. One of the things he did was he said, wait a minute, we ought to be allocating some of the overhead for some of the city departments that are on the general fund to wastewater, to EMS. I mean, we have a lot of people in this building, Mike, that do work that supports those operations. And they're considered enterprise funds. They're supposed to stand on their own. So now we have, in some cases, 10, 20% or whatever of people's salaries, if they really do work a lot of their time to support those operations, being charged to those operations, which is fair. It's not excessive or wrong. It's appropriate that if an employee is spending 10% of his or her time on behalf of wastewater, working with Sam Warp and his department, providing them with information and all these other things, that portion of their salary really ought to be targeted there instead of attributable to the general fund. And so we've made some changes that have helped us. But I think overall, the main thing is that we've really begun to account for things differently. We've cut back our spending a little bit because we didn't have the dollars that we thought were at our disposal back in the days when the TIF transfer issue was going on.
Well, yeah, and that's the perspective that, a private sector guy will bring to, something like city government. Ron being in private sector work for many years and saying, kind of, here's how we do it out there in the real world, so to speak. And maybe that should be the way we do it here, right? I mean, those things work here too, don't they?
They do. Two things. That's one of them. The other is simply being a fresh set of eyes. Somebody coming in and saying, well, I see that you have, wastewater and ambulance funds and they're doing really well. And you have people here who are doing a lot of work to support them. Are you charging back their time where it's appropriate? Well, no, we haven't been. Well, let's look at doing it. Even our TIF districts, he found out that we ought to be charging. We've been giving them advances of money as if we're a bank. Well, state law says that if you're acting like a bank, you can charge interest. So if the city's general fund is to advance money to the Mill Creek Business Park TIF district because they're not doing well, when they pay us back, with the tax increment, we ought to be recouping interest for ourselves, not just the $500,000, let's say, that we loaned, but plus 5% or some amount of interest. So we started doing these little things with Ron's leadership that have made a difference in terms of the general fund.
Okay. Anything else on that item?
No, I think not, but it's really good to be talking about, at the end, you don't know how it's going to turn out. What's our state aid going to be? Oh, it's less than we thought, rats. It's so good to be talking about getting more revenue than we expected from the increase in assessed value, that we could come back the other way and have the choices that we had and ultimately reduce the reserves.
Well, and not only that, but this is a good discussion to have occasionally anyway, because, the average citizen, all they see or hear is tax rate.
Yep.
They see their tax bill and go, all right, it's higher. You know, it's up,
Yeah.
or it's the same, or it's whatever. And that's the bottom line for them. And they don't see all of the behind the scenes stuff that goes on, all of the discussions that have to happen, and all of the numbers and accounts and forms and assessments that go into that final tax rate. They just think it's one number that you
Right.
guys come up with every year, and here's how much we're going to charge the citizens to run. I don't know, what is it, about a fourth of the government every year, a fourth of the city's operations. They don't see things like final assessment, final statement of assessment from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, which is just one of
Many.
probably dozens of documents
Yeah.
that go into that final tax rate. And so it's probably good to sort of remind them and say, look, it's not just a number we throw out there every year and say, I would just feel like charging you this much. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that one number every year.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And they will always probably focus more on the tax rate than anything, the 2.5% or 2% or whatever it is, because ultimately that's what they're going to see. But you're right. They don't know everything behind the scenes. They don't know all the issues we're dealing with, the things that we get thrown at us from the state and the county and others that we have no control over. Every year that transportation aid thing comes and I see an email that says, here's how much money you're going to get, in aid to keep up your roads. And I close my eyes. I don't even want to open the email because I don't know if it's going to go up 100,000, down 100,000. And yet that's going to have a significant impact on our budget.
Yeah, no control over a lot of that stuff.
Yep.
All right, let's go back to the presentations. There was an item that said presentation on proposed statues. And I have a feeling this means sculptures. I think everyone knows who we're talking about. In Wildwood Park. Give us an update on what that item was about.
Yeah, first of all, I've kind of laughed about it. I laughed with the council at the meeting that I was headed out, like many of our council members were, to a conference in Green Bay of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. And I was scrambling to get the agenda done, my part. And, obviously the right word is sculptures. Clyde Winia doesn't make statues. So, but what this is about, Clyde Winia and his wife Nancy have been running Jurassic Park for a long time. Great tourist attraction, brings a lot of people to the community. They spend a lot of dollars where they're here. It's a big part of who we are, even though it's not in our corporate limits. But Clyde is kind of winding down the operation, and rather than sell everything off, they really wanted to donate a lot of pieces to the city that they could be prominently displayed here for people to see, everybody to see, the public in general. So there's been talk for a while, Mike, about bringing them down into the Wildwood Park area. And there's been a group meeting longer than I've known of people trying to say, what would it take to make this work? Because that would be really cool. And so Mark Nelson was here the other night, made a great presentation, after being introduced by Josh Miller. And he said, look, I've been at the heart of this, but other people, Matt McLean's been here working on it with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, now called Visit Marshfield. Tons of other people, the city's Park and Recreation Department's been involved. And we think we have this cool idea. We have people raising money for it and, to design it and everything, but we want to know if the council's behind this. So the intent of the presentation was not to take a vote, but to introduce them to the idea, what they're trying to create, and see if the elected officials here are behind it. Now, they'll come back in 2 weeks on November 9th looking for a vote of support to let them move forward with doing this park, doing this sculpture project. But the feedback was very positive. We had at least 2 members of the council say, I'm so excited to see this, to see that the work that Clyde does out there, that it's going to be brought here and displayed. It's such a part of who we are in Marshfield. So it was received well. I get the idea from what I heard that it's likely to be passed in 2 weeks. And what an idea to bring some of that artwork, and I'll call it that, to our community.
Okay. Also, I saw another agenda item having to do with something we've touched on before, and I guess this maybe was the final approval, I'm not sure, but a request to approve increase to certain taxi fares effective January 1st. And if I remember correctly, it sounds like it's a slight increase in certain taxi fares for certain users that will just make it kind of easier for everybody. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, first of all, let me touch on how this works before. I think we might have talked about how we get funded for the taxi service here. Again, it's provided by Running Incorporated out of Viroqua, operates under the name of Marshfield Transit System. But about 55% of the money comes from federal and state grants. a little over half. And then about 35% or a little bit more comes from taxi fares, people using the cab service. The other portion, less than 10%, hopefully a lot less than 10% if things are going well, comes from the city, makes up the difference. And it's important to us because it serves people who, in many cases, seniors and people with disabilities who really need to get to the doctor's appointments and the grocery store and all the things that they need to visit to be independent. But we looked at it, and we realized that for 4 years, we had not increased the cost. So we talked to Running. They have 20-some communities in Wisconsin. They know what's being charged elsewhere. And we found out that maybe that there were a couple we needed to bump up a little bit. It's been $2.85 for 4 years for people who are getting the reduced fare. Again, seniors and people with disabilities. So we're bumping it up to $3. It's a 15-cent increase. It might be easy for me to stand in a group of people and say, hey, 15 cents, that's no big deal. But if you're on a fixed income, if you have some other financial challenges, 15 cents might be a lot. And then we decided we're going to keep the regular fare at $5. That's really about right for what the communities are charging, we understand. And then we have something called an agency fee that only affects certain companies. These are human service organizations, typically home healthcare type, that buy blocks of these transit services, if you will, for their clients. Ultimately, they recover the cost of this through other means. So we're looking at bumping that up from $8 a ride to $10 a ride. So the council at the meeting, Mike, approved both of these. So effective January 1st, it's going to go to $3 a ride for seniors and people with disabilities, and to $10 per ride for these agencies who buy these blocks on behalf of their clients. Those were the two fees that were deemed to be a little bit low. And again, we publicized this a lot. You helped us, I think maybe others helped us get the word out. We really didn't get a lot of pushback, which I think tells us that people probably realize after 4 years that a 15-cent increase is not unwarranted with inflation and other challenges.
And making change will just be a whole lot easier.
It will.
You won't have that 15-cent difference to try and make up.
And that's why we ended there rather than 305 or some other number.
Okay.
Yep.
Also, it looks like you brought back for some more discussion an issue that got a lot of attention here at recent meetings. And that has to do with the issue of closing City Hall to the public on Fridays at noon year-round, which is something you tried sort of on a trial basis this past summer.
We did, and back in the middle of September, I came to the council and I gave them a report on the trial. It was a 4-week trial running from the second week in August through Labor Day. And I reported that we really, during those 4 weeks when we were closed to the public at noon on Fridays, didn't have a whole lot of people trying to come in or people calling us. We have cameras out there so we could see how many people came into the parking lot, came to the door. Oh no, there's a sign on the door, I can't get service today. And how many people called, whether it was calling Steve Barg or another employee directly or called our general number. How many phone calls did we get between noon and 4:30? And what we found out was, there were people who called, there were people who came, but the numbers weren't all that great. It kind of bore out what our frontline staff has been telling me for a while, and that is that Friday afternoons during the summer are pretty dead. Our employees want to get to the cabin and to the campground. Well, guess what? So do the citizens of our community want to get to their cabins and the campground for summer activities. When I gave the report, the council seemed pleased, but if you recall, they went beyond that. And my thought is I was going to let that sit and then come back 2 weeks later and say, could we make that all summer 2022? Well, they went beyond that right at the meeting and said, let's just make it all year round. People are now getting services online. They don't come here as often. They're doing, all their licenses and permits and other things at home. The number of people who come to this building or have to come to this building is not that great in 2021. COVID kind of pointed that out. People learned that they could get most of what they need from their own living room. But they went beyond, the item was listed on the agenda as for information only, and they went ahead and passed a motion to make it year round. Well, I got a person called me and then wrote to me and said, okay, I don't agree with you closing at noon. I think that's not good for the citizens. I think people ought to be able to come here on Friday afternoon and get service. But I especially am concerned about the fact that I didn't even know about it. There was nothing on the agenda that day that would say, we're going to vote on making this year round. All it said is, Steve Barg's giving a report and it's for information only. So I ran it by the city attorney. He agreed with her basically. He said that the council didn't do anything wrong, illegal or anything, but to be in good practice, it probably shouldn't have been handled that way. And so put it back up for ratification. Bring it back again and see if they're willing to give it another thumbs up. That's what we did. That woman did come to the podium and, made her comments, made an argument on behalf of the fact that she thinks this is not good for the citizens. And then the council discussed it again, had some pros and cons, and ultimately voted, I think it was 8-2, to ratify continuing this all year round. Now, one of the council members, Mike, did say, can you continue to compile statistics so that we look back in 2 months or 3 months or whenever and see how many people are coming to the door, are calling you and not getting people on Friday afternoon. And we can always look at changing course if we need to. And certainly we can continue to compile that data. But the employees here have really appreciated it. They're still working 40-hour weeks. They're either working 9 hours on each day, Monday through Thursday, and then 4 on Friday, or they're doing something, but they're required to put in their full 40, and they're given a little flexibility, which they appreciate, on how to get that done. And some employees stay here on Friday afternoon. They do. They don't like the idea. They like 5 8-hour days, and they're continuing to do that. But there's flexibility to work with your supervisor on that, and I think they appreciate that.
And those those employees that are staying on Friday afternoons are available. If there are questions or something, people can still reach those individuals by telephone?
I think the thing we've tried to say is if anybody needs to meet with somebody or talk to somebody on Friday, let us know and we'll work it out.
Okay.
You can come out of your office, you can meet out here in the lobby, go to a conference room. Those individuals are here to serve you. And we have people who said that they would do it even if they're normally going to leave at noon, they're going to work 4 9s and then Friday morning. If you tell me in advance, I'll be glad to make arrangements. We want to be customer friendly, and I tried to make that clear to the council. But for the most part, this is a good benefit for the citizens, and it seems like the traffic on Friday afternoons is really not that great in most cases anyway.
So, and maybe it's too early to ask this question, but so how many employees are taking you up on the offer? In other words, are there a lot of employees suddenly changing their work hours to that 4 9 in a Friday morning scenario, and they're kind of making it a routine?
Well, Mike, I'm here on Friday afternoons myself anyway. I put in more than 40 hours, sometimes by quite a bit. And I don't know a count of how many people are here compared to not here. I think the majority of employees, it appears, are working the new schedule. They like Friday afternoon off. And some of them are working, without taking lunch on Monday through Thursday. Others are saying, look, I want to take my regular lunch. I'll stay here till 5:30. But if you work with your supervisor and you've got things to do, which almost everybody does all the time, we're being as flexible as we can be. And again, I want to say one more thing. Some people picture this as being all for the employees. We're giving the employees a perk. And I think the person who came to the podium said, basically you gave them a raise. Oh, we didn't give them a raise. They're still working 40 hours. They're not working 36 hours. But, we're trying to work on recruiting and retaining good employees. And there's a lot of years, you've seen it here, we can't give much in the way of raises. We have hard times. And I know the private sector is giving 3%, but we can only afford to give you 1% or whatever. This is one thing that doesn't cost us anything that's being received really well, that people are still getting their work done. The council doesn't have to authorize more money. And it seems like the citizens, for the most part, are being, their needs are being handled. And so we continue to watch for complaints and we'll deal with them. But I think it seems like a win-win for the most part.
Okay. All right, there was also a request to appoint David Patton, 1512 East 25th Street, to the Fire and Police Commission. Did that happen?
No, it didn't, but then it didn't have to happen. If you look at the agenda item under recommended action, it's they can do that on the first reading, kind of like an ordinance, or they can wait the full 2 weeks to think about it. And there were some positive comments made. Mr. Patton came to the podium, talked about his background as a firefighter and some other things. And at least 2 members of the council, seemed like they felt positive about him. But when it came time to, I think Council President Paschal said, do you want to waive the rules or suspend the rules and vote tonight, or do you want to wait till 2 weeks? The consensus was, let's let the normal procedure play out and decide in 2 weeks. And this is important it's always important, but we're in the middle of the police chief recruitment process, and the fire chief has submitted his resignation effective, basically the end of the year. So this new person that we bring on board in a month or so will be involved in the replacement of our 2 public safety department heads. It doesn't get much bigger than that. So it's an important position. I think to think about it for 2 weeks, before you take the final vote is not a bad thing.
And this is a different selection. I mean, this is not the original appointee, if you will, that was presented to the council. This is sort of the second attempt at filling this unexpired term, right?
Yeah, we got 8 applications, emails with people who were interested. And Nick had brought somebody forward, the council president, back in September. And when they took the vote at the second meeting, it was a 5-5 tie. We don't have a mayor to break the tie, so the motion to approve her failed. And he's gone back to the other 7 applicants, and this is one of them, Mr. Patton. So, and I don't want people to take this as a negative. Some people might be watching this and think, wait a minute, do I want to put my name, in the hat for a committee or a board or commission? It looks like it might be something what if people don't like me, or what if people want somebody else? For the most part, our appointments go fairly smoothly. I know this is a big appointment with the PFC, but we want you involved. If you're hearing me right now, if you're interested in parks, if you're interested in historic preservation, whatever it is, please contact me. We'd love to have you jump onto these boards when there's an opening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that was pretty much the agenda in a nutshell. Were there any other items that I'm missing, or any other issues, I guess, that, I don't know, you'd like to update us on that maybe weren't on the agenda?
For a change, we didn't have anything in closed. We almost always have one or more closed session items on a development agreement or a contract or something. There was none of that this time. I think the other thing I would do is just go back real briefly to the clinic, because I know a lot of people in the community are talking about that, Mike. Just to kind of recap, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, but we have now signed a lease with the clinic for them to put the skywalk between the east wing and the hospital. And they're out there building it now, as I understand. They have the contractors ready to go. They were on hold during some of the discussions. There are continuing conversations between officials from the clinic and the city about the tax case, the claim that they're making, looking for exemption on 2 parcels that they don't feel that they should have to pay taxes on. That there might be some ideas that come out of that would avoid litigation. I don't know. And the bigger thing is we're getting more intentional now about having meetings and discussions just in general between the clinic and the city. You're our biggest taxpayer, your biggest employer. We're the city. We need to maybe be in closer contact with one another about what we're thinking, where we're going, what's going to happen in 3 years, 5 years. It's not that we were delinquent before, but we want to be more proactive. So I think you're going to hear more about that too, and hopefully that'll be a benefit to all. Other than that, I think we're just kind of happy to get through the budget process. That'll go to public hearing on November 23rd, and we'll just keep moving forward.
Yeah, you did wrap up, you had a couple of special budget sessions, 2 of them, to kind of go over what your, proposed spending plan for next year looked like. Was that basically the gist of those 2 meetings?
Yeah, it was. And last year we had 4 meetings, and they were fairly contentious. I mean, and part of the reason why is we were proposing a higher tax rate increase that nobody liked. But I thank the council again for doing that. It got us more commensurate with other communities and with what we really needed to be completely funding our services. This time we looked at 2.5% increase in tax rate, 2.8% increase in expenses. 2.8% increase in expenses, given what we're facing with inflation and some other things, really isn't all that bad. So I think that made it a little bit less concerning from the start, and we got through it in a shorter period of time.
So then that goes to the council sometime in November?
Yeah, the public hearing will now be on November 23rd. Ron Ullman, our finance director, will be putting it out in the official city newspaper as required by law on, I think, November 6th, somewhere in there. Has to be 15 days before the public hearing. And the public can still weigh in. I mean, if you're watching me right now and you want to weigh in on how we tax and spend, you've got concerns, you've got questions, please do so. The council that very night can make changes, but the bulk of their work has been done to this point.
Do you know what where did the final numbers land then in terms of the overall budget and in terms of the I guess, taxpayer portion of it?
You mean compared to the school and the county and everybody else? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the total city budget is what, 40-some million?
Yeah, 40-some million. And then the general fund part that we talk about a lot is about 23 million. That's the part that's made up of the basic services, police, fire, public works. And then the overall, of course, that takes in wastewater and EMS and others. That brings us almost to 50 million, I think.
Okay.
And, you know, there's a lot of things we've had to do to meet state law. I mean, state law, a lot of people are hearing us talk about revaluing the property, and they think that the minute we do revaluation, oh, great, all the house prices are going to go way up. But the state caps the amount of money that we can levy from them anyway. So what'll happen at that point largely is reducing the mill rate. I think what we did is prudent. I think it's commensurate. I think we talked about this last time, but Stevens Point is expecting to be $10.46, and we're going to be $10.51. Wisconsin Rapids is higher than both of us. So not that we want to always compare to other cities. I mean, we want to get the best bang for the buck here in Marshfield, but I think we've gotten to the point now where we're really where we belong. We just didn't know it before, where we're using funds that we probably shouldn't have been using. And you'll probably see small annual increases in the tax rate just to keep up with the cost of doing business. Hopefully minimal, but you know, we have to incur the same costs that people do at home with everything from paper clips to equipment to whatever.
Okay. Well, that's all I had. Anything else?
I don't think so, Mike. I think that wraps it up for another program. Thank you very much. Thanks to Mike Warren from representing Hub City Times for leading the discussion here. And I want to thank you for tuning in. This concludes another edition of the Post-Council Meeting News Conference. On behalf of Mike and me and everybody else here at City of Marshfield, thank you and have a great day.